This is episode 67 of the Why Not Me podcast, how I realized trauma was still affecting me. I'm your host, Danita Bremer. I'm a wife, mom, member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and a life coach. And in this podcast, we talk about how to overcome our internal obstacles, like trauma, to endure this life well. I wanted to start out, first of all, by telling you that I've been a little bit under the weather. I've had a cold. I'm feeling fine today, but every time I get a cold, it affects my voice, which you're going to hear from time to time on the podcast. And I also wanted to read a review because I'm so grateful when people review the podcast and give me 5 stars. And I think you should get a little shout out for that. Bear gave me 5 stars and said, I discovered you on Instagram and immediately started listening to your podcast last night. I am 7 episodes in and love the authenticity, knowledge, and calm that you bring. Thank you, Bear. Yes, I'm so grateful for any feedback that you have. I would love to hear your takeaways, your favorite takeaway from the podcast. If you listen to only one episode or all of them, it just gives me a little spark to keep going, to know that the work that I'm doing in the world is helping people. And that is actually really important, right? Today, I started outlining an episode about how to tell if trauma is affecting you, and it got super long. So, this episode is going to be kind of my story, my journey of how I realized trauma was, I say still affecting me, but how I realized what trauma was, how it was affecting me, how it's been affecting me my whole life. And I'm hoping that hearing about my journey and the little tiny aha moments and kind of steps that I had to take along the way will help you reflect on your life and see how the Lord's hand is in your life, around you at all times, leading you. And I'm also hoping to kind of do a little bit of education here about what trauma is and how it's bigger and more pervasive than we tend to think, and how it really is affecting every one of us. Education around trauma is so needed. And in next week's episode, I'll talk more about what trauma is as I understand it and how you might be able to tell if it's showing up in your life. So, I wanted to start back before my family and I decided to move to Germany. I feel like I'm pretty typical suburban mom kind of life. I mean, if you've been listening to my podcast, you know it. My background, my childhood maybe wasn't as typical as some of us might think, but then again, there are so many people in this world with experiences just like the ones that I've had, and experiences worse, right? So-called worse experiences that we as humans would classify as worse or more traumatic or more difficult in some way. And so, um, I didn't have the best childhood upbringing. There were traumatic events, big T and little t, and I'm going to talk about what that means a little bit later. Um, but overall, I have always felt like I have a pretty good life and I don't have it so bad, and like I'm healthy, and I've figured out a lot of this life and how to survive it and how to navigate it. So I was this typical suburban mom trying to figure out how to be a mom, how to live a good life, how to, you know, be a positive impact in the world. But I still just felt all the time like I was drowning. And I really love that analogy of drowning because you can feel like you're drowning for a long time when you're thrashing and keeping yourself just barely above water. And that is sort of how I felt right before we decided to move to Germany. Now, don't get me wrong, there were amazing things about my life, and all of the external things, the house in the suburbs, the 3-car garage, the cars. I mean, growing up, our cars were breaking down every 9 months or something, right? And here I have and can afford a car that basically just needs oil changes every 6 months and it runs for years and years. That's just crazy to me, right? Um, I have the gospel in my life. I've got these three amazing, beautiful kids. I have an awesome husband who is so supportive and provides and all of these things. So it wasn't any of the external things. It was just the internal things that I was really struggling with. And I've thought a lot about this. I don't know that I would have felt like I really needed help if I hadn't have moved to Germany. Because here in Colorado, I had a support network. I was sort of, going through these motions of I've got a good life kind of thing. But moving to Germany and being sort of separated from my support network, from what I knew, from what was familiar, all of that made me realize like it almost stripped away all of the external things that I was like using to be like, yeah, I've got this great life. I'm good. Right. And moving to Germany stripped all of that away. In addition to that, the weather is gray and cold, and it really affects me. I wish it didn't, but it does. And it put me in this sort of like bottom of the well place, right? Where it made me realize how much I really was struggling internally, that my life in Colorado in the United States was almost keeping me from realizing that because there were so many good things in so many ways, so many crutches and things to lean on. And so moving to Germany took a lot of that away, not all of it, but a lot of it. And it just made me realize how much I was really struggling internally. And it made me reach out for help. And so, and I've talked a little bit about this on the podcast before, but I can look back and I can see the little breadcrumbs that the Lord put in front of me to lead me to that, right? The breadcrumb of homeschooling my kids, because I don't think I would have gone to Germany if my kids were in school and they were attached to their way of life in that way. Things like that. And so I just can look back and see how, the whole time the Lord was right with me and he was leading me along to where I needed to go so that I could make these realizations on my own. So in Germany is where I felt desperate and reached out for help. The way I did it was I searched in my podcast app. It was my first kind of step. And my plan was if I couldn't find something online, then I would figure out how to find a therapist in Germany. That was a little bit foreign and scary to me. And like, how do we pay for that? And is there going to be a language barrier and all of that kind of stuff? So I just thought, well, first I'll see if there's some resources in my podcast app online or something like that that are available to me that I won't have to do all of that legwork for. And that's when I found Jody Moore and life coaching. And it opened my mind to this idea of our thoughts create our feelings and feeling so empowered in that way. My mentors, of course, Jody Moore and Brooke Castillo were huge mentors. Cara Lowenthal, huge mentor. And about 2 years into this journey of discovering life coaching, just voraciously eating up all of the concepts that I could, I recognized there was like this inner seeker in me that wanted to go deeper. And about 2 years after becoming a certified coach, some of these higher level, more experienced certified coaches started offering these advanced certifications, and Jody Moore was one of them. And I tried to get into her advanced certification and it sold out in a matter of seconds. Like, I kid you not, it was like less than 3 seconds. It sold out. And I was bummed about that. I really wanted to go deeper in my understanding of the tools and the application of it and all of that. And kind of through, you might call it a twist of fate or whatever, but now I just see it was God leading me along the path I needed to be on. I found out that Bev Aaron, who is a big name in the life coach school, was offering an advanced certification. I hadn't been in Bev's sort of sphere of influence. I hadn't really checked her out. I knew of her. She had done some like on stage talks. And so I knew her. I had seen her talk a couple times. I had seen her coach a couple times, but I didn't really know Bev that well. And I went to her website to find out more about her advanced certification. And the funny part is, I don't even remember how I found out about her advanced certification. I think maybe a coach friend of mine mentioned it, but I don't remember who it was or exactly what those dots were. And I went to her website and immediately started reading about her advanced certification. I was like, yes, this is what I need. She talked about using your intuition more. She talked about not feeling drained after you coach. And I was like, yes, I love coaching so much, but man, does it drain my energy at the end of the day. It's kind of like when I was the primary music leader. I loved that calling. That's been my favorite calling of all time. And yet, every Sunday after doing that calling, I would need to take a nap because it just drained me so much. And so there were several things on her website describing her advanced certification that just deeply resonated with me. Like my body was like, yes, you have to sign up for this. And so I signed up. It was expensive. It was $15,000. That's almost as much as coach training was in the first place. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm crazy. I don't know how I'm going to make this money back. And yet I did, right? And so I jump into Bev's training. I describe it like I jumped in with both feet and my eyes closed because I had little snippets of like, yes, I want to know how to coach without it draining my energy. And yes, I want to know how to go deeper, faster, and how to use my intuition and all of those kinds of things, right? Except I didn't really know what to expect. So Bev's training, and this was in January of 2021. I had done a year of coaching with Amy Latta in 2020, almost actually a little bit more than a year, which was confidence coaching, which I was like, okay, I just need more confidence and then I can be successful. I had done that year. I was feeling really good. I had some high goals and I was like, this is the thing I need. This advanced certification. I want to go deeper with the tools. I want to be able to serve my clients at a deeper level. This is exactly what I need. It's going to be so amazing. And I got into this training starting January of 2021. And I got about a month in and I was like, what is going on here? I have no idea why I signed up for this, what I'm doing. I'm totally going to fail. That's where my brain was, is like, I don't know what Bev is talking about when she's talking about being embodied and having resonant thoughts and things like that. And I was just like I started feeling like I was drowning again. And I coached myself around that. I thought, okay, what if we don't? What if we've spent $15,000 and we don't get certified? And I got myself to a place where I was okay with that, where I was like, clearly there was a reason why I needed to be here now. I felt it. It was like a spiritual prompting. It was like when I got the prompting to homeschool my kids and I didn't really want to homeschool them, but it just was like, I just knew I had to. That is the experience I had when signing up for Bev's program. And so I couldn't deny that. And so I got myself to this place of peace of like, for whatever reason, I needed to be here now. And if I don't get certified, then that's okay. I'm still adding tools to my toolbox. And it kind of grounded me. And then what happened as soon as I did that is I got certified, right? The drama settled in my mind. I just started focusing. I started showing up more authentically without like, what are other people going to think? I still got really nervous when coaching in front of Bev, but I was just like, I don't care. Like if I fail, I fail. And so I think I showed up more as me and I was able to certify in her program pretty close to the end of her program. And so I was like one of the top 10, one of the first 10 people that certified in her program because I went through the very first iteration of this advanced certification. But one thing happened right at the end of the 3 months in Bev's program. She introduced us to Sarah Payton. Now, Sarah Payton is the author of a book called Your Resonant Self. And I don't even know how to describe her really. She is an educator and she doesn't really call herself a coach, but she doesn't have I don't think she has a master's or a PhD in some of these things. She basically, I view her as a coach, but she has a lot of experience with her own trauma and her own journey of learning how to not be so critical with herself, learning what we call resonance. And I'll explain that a little bit more, using warmth, just kindness to heal. And it was exactly what I needed. And so I thought, oh my gosh, maybe this is why I'm here in Bev's program. Like I needed to know about Sarah Payton. And she had this free summit, which by the way, I think it's a yearly thing that she does. Today was the first day of the free Resonance Summit that she does. So I'm going to drop the link in the show notes. So, well, you're going to come at this next week, but you can go back and buy that. It's like $150, I think. But it's excellent. So look up Sarah Payton. She at the time was doing this free summit, and I went to look at it, and it was like all of these classes for like 5 days in a row. And it didn't really jive with my schedule. I was kind of overwhelmed, but I did get on her email list. I signed up. So I thought, okay, Bev is recommending Sarah. I trust Bev. I want to know more about this lady. I'm interested, but I just didn't feel like I had the capacity at the time. And so I got on the email list. And then very shortly after that, I think about a month later, she offered a class on shame. It was like a 12-week class. And it was all about how to use resonance to heal shame. And at the time I was calling myself a shame coach. That's, if you've been along this podcast the whole time, you'll know that it used to be called Shame Proof Your Life. And I was like, well, I have to sign up for this class, right? And what I learned from Sarah Payton was, it changed me profoundly. She uses neurobiology and these really simple tools that I remember sitting in her class, and she was talking about the left brain and the right brain, and how the right brain is where our essential self is, and the left brain is where our judging self is. And we turn away from our right brain, our left brain turns away from our right brain. And that's basically what shame is. And it was like something clicked in me. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is why it's so important to speak to ourselves kindly. It's the process of turning back toward ourselves. And I don't know why, but for me, that just was so powerful. From there, I'm introduced to Sarah Payton right before the end of Bev's program. And I'm also introduced to a coach named Megan Ladd. And Bev recommended that we all, as deep dive coaches, we have our own coaches at all times, our own one-on-one coach. And so as I was thinking about my next steps after Bev's program, where I wanted to go with my own sort of development and all of that, I thought, I really liked Megan Ladd. She came and guest taught in Bev's program, and her energy was so good. And something about her, I was just drawn to her. So I set up a consultation with her, and I ended up hiring her. And I worked with her for 3 months. Right as Bev's program ended, I started working with Megan, and it was an amazing experience, but it was still mostly mindset. And I realized at the end of coming to the end of our relationship in coaching, I thought, do I want to hire Megan again? Or what do I need? What do I need to learn here? And what really came up is I need to feel safe being seen, right? Safe being seen on social media, on like if I do webinars or whatever, like it was like I felt not totally safe to be seen. Like it was activating me. Now that's the word I would use. Like it was activating my nervous system when I thought about having success. And I actually said those words to Megan, like one of our last sessions. And I realized that I didn't think that continuing working with Megan was the right thing, but I didn't know what was. And so we said our goodbyes, and I randomly listened to a podcast that I don't normally listen to. And Danielle Cohen was the guest on the podcast. And she described herself as a visibility coach. She helps people feel safe being seen, right? And I was like, my jaw dropped to the ground. I was like, what? That is just what I told my coach this last week. Like, I feel like I need to feel safe being seen. And I immediately went to her website, looked her up, scanned through. I don't even think I like carefully read. I scanned through everything on her website, every page. And I was just like, this is what I need. This is what I've been realizing is the next step for me. So I think I emailed her, and I couldn't tell if she had a program. She had a group program. I couldn't tell if it was still open or not because her website was saying like starts June, whatever. And it was past that date already. And so I email her, and she emails me back and she said, can I call you? Can we jump on a call? And so we jump on a call, and this is all happening like within a matter of an hour or two after listening to that podcast with her. And she explains her program. And I said, this is going to sound crazy, but yeah, sign me up. This is what I need. And it felt like God was, here's the next step. Here's the next step, right? He was just like putting the next right thing in front of me. And so I worked with Danielle for 6 months in her group program. And Danielle is this beautiful soul who is very aware of things like trauma and systemic oppression and some of these things that are coming to the surface right now. And I felt a little bit like I was not quite in the wrong room, but I was like the dumb one in the class. Like I thought everybody else knows what she's talking about. And I just didn't really even know her when I signed up, but I just kept reminding myself, I'm supposed to be here in this room right now. And I kept showing up as my full self. Danielle coaches around like branding and visibility. And so she taught me a lot about really the bigger questions and the bigger thoughts behind branding and showing up to the world and, using your full voice and taking up your space. And it was exactly the bridge I needed at the time. So this was late last year, 2021. And we were finishing up in December. And she offered for us to continue going with her in her next group. And I just realized, I was like, I have trauma. Like I have things in my nervous system that are unresolved that I need to figure out. And so I went looking for somebody that could help me with trauma. And I found Shyla Cash. Now, that was a name that I had heard, a name that had gone around in the coaching circles that I was familiar with. And so I was like, oh, Shyla Cash, she, I think, does trauma stuff. So I went to her podcast and I started binging her podcast. And I realized that like, I'm listening to these earlier episodes where she's inviting you to like get on a consultation call. And I was like, oh my gosh, she probably doesn't even do one-on-one anymore. I need to find out right away. And so I went to her website, and she still had on her website for links to a consultation call. And so I signed up because I was like, I can't wait. Like, I don't even know where she is in her business. She might not be doing one-on-ones anymore. Maybe she's doing group. And I really wanted to do one-on-one. And so I did the consultation, and I just knew I had to hire her. And it wasn't part of my plan. I was like, I can't spend any more money before the end of the year and all of this stuff. But I wanted to tell you the analogy, the picture that came up in my mind as I reflected back on each one of these steps that got me to realizing I have trauma that's really affecting me and holding me back in my life still today. Trauma from when I was a kid, probably, right? And just like probably many of you, I was thinking of trauma as like a traumatic event, like a car accident or a rape or sexual abuse or something like that, some like one time big event. That's trauma, right? And as I was learning more, and I mean, this whole year, 2021, I was learning more about the nervous system and embodiment and being able to feel and what prevents us from being able to feel and trauma and all these things. And somewhere along the line in that year, the video, The Wisdom of Trauma, came out by Gabor Mate. He's sort of the main character in that. It's a documentary, but he's the main professional being interviewed. And I learned even more about trauma. And I just felt like I was being submersed in this learning about trauma and what trauma is and how it affects everyone. And so the visual that came up was like when I was a girl, when I was a baby, an infant, a toddler, a young girl, and growing up, it was like I was being thrown into the ocean and I didn't know how to swim. And I would be thrown in, and somehow I would thrash and wail and survive. And somebody would come and rescue me out, and I would be thrown in and got taken out and thrown in and out of the ocean over and over again. And so it's like I have this fear of water. But then when I became an adult, it was like I'm just now treading water in the ocean. And I'm like, the waves are crashing over me, but somehow I'm like keeping my head above the water. And I'm just treading and I'm doing the best I can, right? And I'm like floating to give myself some breaks. But it was really this image of, oh my gosh, like the traumas that I endured in my childhood were like me being tossed into the water and not knowing how to swim. And then as an adult, I feel like I've just barely been keeping my head above the water and I've been using so much energy to survive, really. And I know this sounds like so dramatic, but this is what it feels like and felt like in my body. Like I just almost couldn't breathe sometimes. And it was just so tiring all the time. And when I came to thought work, it was like somebody gave me a floaty, like a blow up floaty. And it was like I had this, sometimes I could kind of get on the floaty and float for a while and be like, oh, this is amazing. Or maybe it was like someone was teaching me how to swim. So now with thought work and mindset work, I was given these tools of like, wow, I can actually change my position and like I could swim to the shore. But then as soon as I got to the shore, I would get pulled back out again. Right. And I could never fully get on land. And so mindset work and thought work, oh my gosh, such a huge blessing in my life, right? Like it gave me a respite. It gave me tools to like learn how to swim in the big waves and how to enjoy the water and things like that. But it was just like this surface layer. It didn't really teach me how to get out of the water. And it wasn't until I hired Shyla Cash, and she does almost exclusively, she does mindset work a little bit too, but mostly 95%, it's somatic work. It's just working with your body and what's happening in your body. And it was like she pulled me out of the water and brought me into her boat. And I was still thrashing and swimming, right? I didn't realize that I wasn't in the water still. And so working with Shyla, and I've been working with her for about 5 months. It's been amazing. And it's been so transformational. And that's sort of the analogy I think of. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been treading water and swimming. And you know what? At a certain point, I had babies. And so then I was like holding on to these babies and treading water. And it was just like, I am drowning. Right. And she has swept me out of the water and brought me into the boat. And I'm still not on dry land yet. I don't know if I'll ever be on dry land, to be honest. This life might be more of a getting used to the ocean and the waves and the tides and all of that. I feel like sometimes I can get to dry land, but really having Shyla rescue me, bring me into her boat, and it's like she knows how to navigate that boat. She knows how to deal in a boat in the ocean. She's adept at it. And I'm sure she would even say that she doesn't know everything. But that's what it felt like to me, that now Shyla and I are in this boat that's pretty sturdy and we're mostly kept from the waves, not completely. Sometimes a wave splashes up kind of thing. And she is right there with me. And she's like, you know how to swim. Come on, you got this. Right. So that has been so amazing, so life-changing, so transformational. And I wanted to just mention here some books also that really helped me understand what trauma was and helped me relate to it in my own body. The first one is by Bessel van der Kolk. It's called The Body Keeps the Score, and it's one of the kind of landmark trauma books in the industry. And he does such a good job of explaining and educating around how trauma is stored in your body and how traditional therapy, talk therapy, and I would really kind of put coaching in this category too, can't get to all of the trauma. Like we need therapies that are more based in our bodies. It's a wonderful book. It's very accessible, easy to understand. He walks through several different types of therapy toward the end of the book and how they help and what he's noticed. And he's been doing this work for a long time. Highly recommend that book. The next one is Waking the Tiger by Peter Levine. Peter Levine is also just a giant in the industry, and he's been around for a long time. I will say I haven't finished this book. I picked it up. I think I picked it up before The Body Keeps the Score. And it was like it kind of activated me a little bit. And it was almost like too much information all at once. And so I had to put it back down. But I recently re-picked it up and I'm finishing it now. And it's also very easy to understand, accessible. It takes the perspective of like our bodies as animals and using sort of like what happens in the animal kingdom to understand what happens in our bodies and why kind of having this developed brain sometimes works against us in trauma. And it's really amazing and wonderful. He has some exercises in there. I just haven't finished it yet, but I highly recommend that from what I have read. The next book is a book that came out, I think last year, toward the end of the year, maybe, or maybe during the summer. And it's What Happened to You by Oprah Winfrey and Bruce Perry. So of course, you know of Oprah Winfrey and of her sort of mission to help people overcome their childhood experiences because she had a pretty traumatic childhood as well. And Bruce Perry is an expert in childhood trauma. And they have had a relationship for many, many years. And he's been on the Oprah Winfrey show. And so they co-authored this book together. And it's like a conversation about childhood traumas and what happens in different situations and things that Dr. Perry has learned throughout his 30 to 40 year career. And it's amazing. At the beginning of that book, they also said there's some heavy things in there and you might get kind of triggered or activated. but I never felt that. I read it all in a couple of days, and I just thought it was an amazing book. And it really helped me understand some of the childhood things that happened for me. I want to go back to Sarah Payton's book, Your Resonant Self. This one I also haven't finished. It's very thick. It's like a college textbook. You have to take it very slowly, but the concepts that I have learned from Sarah, and I've read maybe like a quarter of her book, they're just amazing. It's the kind of book that I don't even want to finish because it's so full of so much wisdom and like, here, go try this exercise, try this meditation. She also has a YouTube channel that I know is full of lots of free resources. And she has a workbook that goes along with the Your Resonant Self book. And I have both of them. So that's something that I plan on working through. And from what I have read, it's been so amazing. So much so that I put it down so that I can put it into practice, really. And then Gabor Mate is another one. I haven't read any of his books, but I have heard that they're pretty amazing. But I do recommend the video, The Wisdom of Trauma. And I've listened into he's had some webinars and things like that I've listened to. And these are the resources that I have personally have some experience with. I know there's so many more out there. Gabor Mate, I will say, he works specifically in trauma and addiction, which is an interesting piece for me to explore because of my parents and their addictions. And understanding, he talks more about understanding sort of the larger sort of community effect of trauma. And I find that interesting. He is from Europe, from kind of the post-World War II era. And I believe he's Jewish. And so I've learned from him and from What Happened to You and Bruce Perry about generational trauma and how trauma can be passed from one generation to the next. And that is just mind-blowing to me, really. And so this episode is getting kind of long, and I just wanted to end with telling you about an experience that I've had recently about just about trauma and the education around trauma. I have felt called to work as a trauma coach and like to sort of learn more about trauma and the tools around trauma and how to help people out of their own traumas. But I have also felt so inadequate with that. Like I have felt the Spirit say, this is the direction you're going. This is what you need to be doing. This is why I've given you these experiences in your life. But I have felt so like, Lord, I am not qualified. I am inadequate. I'm not ready for that. And in the last couple of weeks through my scripture study, I've really been focusing on bringing the Lord into my prayers in relation to this specific problem of feeling called to do work around trauma and yet feeling very inadequate around it. So the first thing that happened was that I was reading in Ether about the brother of Jared and how he saw the Lord's finger, and then the Lord asked him, "You didn't see my whole body, right?" And he said, "No, Lord, show thyself unto me." And before the Lord showed himself to the brother of Jared, he asked a question. He said, "Believest thou the words which I will say unto you?" And that question stopped me in my tracks. And I realized in that moment of reading it, I realized I'm not believing the Lord when he says, "This is your work. This is what I'm calling you to." I'm not believing him. I'm not trusting him. Then a few days after that, as I'm still thinking about feeling inadequate, I realized that Moses felt very inadequate. And I posted this on my social media, so some of you might have seen this. I realized Moses felt inadequate. And so I went back to the story of Moses, which is in Exodus chapters 3 and 4. And I read specifically, I was like, I want to hear, like, I want to see this. And Moses gets called to this mighty work of leading the Israelites out of Egypt, out of their bondage. And he's like, who? Me? Me? And I just relate so much to Moses. And Moses gives the Lord several excuses. He's like, they're not going to believe me. The Israelites aren't going to believe me that I saw you. And then the Pharaoh won't do what I ask. And then I'm slow of speech. I can't talk very well. I can't do this. And the Lord gets a little bit angry, right? And I am just like, oh my gosh, this is what is happening for me. The Lord is calling me to a work and I'm giving him excuses and I'm focusing on my own shortcomings, my own inadequacies. And when I'm focusing on my inadequacies, I'm not focusing on the Lord's power. And that really hit me. And so I journaled a prayer and I said, Heavenly Father, I hear you calling me to be a trauma coach, and I am scared and I feel inadequate and I don't know that I can do it. And immediately in my mind was the words, I won't send you anyone that you can harm. Right? Because that's essentially my worry, is that I will hurt someone more than I help them. And I just felt this gentle, loving response of like, I'm not going to send you anyone that you're going to be able to hurt. And I realized in that moment too, just like I could just see so much my lack of faith and how I wasn't seeing God's role in all of this. Like, it's not about me. I might be the vessel, but this is about Christ's power and his love for all of us. And I keep feeling this sense of there are so many women who are in the same position as you, who have trauma, who haven't worked through it, and it's holding them back. And I want to call them to a great work too. And they need to overcome it before they can do the work that they're meant to do in this world. So, with great fear and trepidation and courage, I'm moving forward as a trauma coach. And I'm going to do a certification later this year to help me become more educated. And yet I still see how I am more educated, even in this current moment, than many, many people out there. The things that I have taken the time to learn, some people don't understand them. I've been going back and forth with a client of mine on Voxer, and she was asking me about, wait, but this thing that happened when I was a kid, how is it still affecting me now? And I realized, oh, yeah, she's not the only one that needs to understand that. And that as I learn more, I can still help people. I have done a lot of work on my own journey and I have learned a lot. Trauma is not just the big traumatic events. Trauma is also those little things, those scary things that happen to us over and over again. Gabor Mate would say, trauma is what happens inside of you when something happens outside of you. And I like to say trauma is the emotions that happened inside of you that never got fully resolved, that we're still holding on to it, that our body is still holding on to and needs resolution. That's trauma. It can look like something really simple, like somebody once said, you're ugly. That could be an emotional sting that never got resolved. It doesn't have to be a big traumatic event. That's why there's a difference between trauma with a big T, which is a traumatic event like a car accident or rape or something like that, and trauma with a little t, which is just the everyday traumas that happen to us that we have an emotional response to, and then we have nowhere to resolve it or understand it or, play it out. And so that's what we call complex trauma or developmental trauma. And that's really what I want to focus on because that's been my experience. And I've had some big T traumas too, but honestly, the big T traumas, they were easier for me to get over than the developmental complex traumas. The things like watching my parents fight every day for weeks on end, or just consistently for 20 years, right? So I just feel called to this work. I know that I have learned a lot that I can give to other people, and I'm still going to be learning. I know that education around trauma is so needed. And next week, I will talk more in depth about what trauma is as I understand it and how it might be showing up in your life, how you might have traumas and not even know how they're holding you back. And maybe I'll also talk about some of the work and what that work looks like. That's enough for now, and so are you. If this episode made you think about yourself or others or God in a new way, would you please give it a 5-star rating and tell me your favorite takeaway in a review? And if you're ready to overcome your internal obstacles and show up to this human experience as your highest self, go to danitabrummer.com to schedule a free session with me. Until next time, go be you and follow the spirit.